Avengers Endgame has arrived, and there's a strong argument to be made that it's the most epic, ambitious, and crowd-pleasing superhero movie of all time, flaws included. It's also by far the most fan service-heavy MCU movie to date, packing its hefty 181-minute runtime with a litany of sneaky Easter eggs and also references to prior movies in the franchise. Spoiler alert, obviously, and we've got a lot to get through, so I'm Will, you know the drill, let's go. Number 32, Thanos decimates Google. Before we get to the movie itself, here's a little cute Easter egg created by Google to celebrate Endgame's release. Basically, punch Thanos into their search engine and you'll be greeted with a small Infinity Gauntlet icon next to the search field. Select the gauntlet and see half of your search results be wiped away in a matter of seconds. Obviously reminiscent of Infinity War's shocking final snap. Number 31, the MCU's amputation obsession continues. It won't be much of a shock to MCU fans that the franchise is quite partial to a severed limb or two, and Endgame once again sees a character deprived of their arm because why the hell not? The likes of Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers Age of Ultron, Ant-Man, Captain America Civil War, and Avengers Infinity War all feature gnarly acts of dismemberment, and in its opening act, Endgame joins the club. As the Avengers launch their initial assault on Thanos, Thor slices the Mad Titan's Infinity Gauntlet-clad arm clean off with a swing of trusty Stormbreaker. And if that's not enough, he follows up by separating Thanos' head from the rest of his body. Number 30, The Matrix. After Thanos informs the Avengers that he's already reduced the Infinity Stone down to atoms to prevent himself or anyone else using them again, he tells the heroes, "I am inevitable." That line and Brolin's delivery are both unmistakably reminiscent of The Matrix's iconic antagonist Agent Smith, whose favourite word might just be inevitable. For extra good measure, Thanos repeats the line in the film's third act climax, but that time he gets a rather neat retort from Iron Man. Number 29, Joe Russo and Daughter's cameo. Keep your eyes peeled for Endgame's co-director Joe Russo, who makes yet another cameo in the MCU. After appearing as minor Doctor characters in both Captain America the Winter Soldier and Civil War, this time as a member of Captain America's support group. In a frankly distracting cameo, Russo gets a surprising number of spoken lines. Russo's two daughters, Ava and Leah, also appear in the film in small but memorable roles. Ava portrays Hawkeye's daughter Leela Barton, while Leah plays a young girl who approaches Professor Hulk and asks for a picture during his introductory scene. Number 28, Morgan Stark. When Endgame leaps forward 5 years into the future, it's revealed that Tony Stark and Pepper Potts now have a young daughter, Morgan. This is especially interesting as Tony mentioned to Pepper at the start of Infinity War that he dreamt they had a son named Morgan, and Morgan Stark is also the name of Tony's uncle in the comics. Morgan Stark in the comics is also a dick. Infinity War even mentions this with a slight twist, with Tony referring to Morgan as Pepper's eccentric uncle. It's fair to say that most fans likely expected Tony to have a son rather than a daughter in the future, but given the whole sins of the father motif, it might feel a little on the nose in a movie that literally has Tony travel back to the past and hang out with his own father. It was a smart change. Number 27, Community cameos continue. Between them, the Russo brothers directed many episodes of the hit TV show Community, and throughout their MCU movies, they've included sporadic cameos from many of the series' cast members to hilarious effects, and Endgame is certainly no exception, with Chang and Shirley both showing up at different points. They're also not even slightly hiding the cameos anymore, it's kind of crazy. Number 26, all the time travel movie references. Because this is a time travel movie thoroughly aware of its own silliness, it of course has to invoke some of the most acclaimed and not time travel movies of all time. We get references to Star Trek, Terminator, Time Cop, Time After Time, Quantum Leap, A Wrinkle in Time, Hot Tub Time Machine, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, as well of course as Back to the Future. Scott also includes Die Hard among the list of time travel movies, but he does quickly realize his mistake. Number 25, Baby Thanos. At one point, someone floats the prospect of just traveling back in time and murdering Thanos as a baby, much to Hulk's disgust. This is almost certainly a reference to a recent comic, Cosmic Ghost Rider #1, where the Punisher, who has been forced to become the Cosmic Ghost Rider by Odin, travels back in time to kill Thanos. However, Frank Castle finds himself unable to commit the deed and instead decides to raise the little Mad Titan himself. And it actually doesn't turn out too badly, with Thanos becoming that universe's new Punisher. Number 24, Professor Hulk. One of the most entertaining surprises in Endgame is that after spending 18 months in a Gamma lab, Bruce Banner has found a way to merge himself with the Hulk, retaining both the intellect of Banner and the brute strength of Hulk. But this wasn't a mere creation for the movie. Marvel Comics have tinkered around with the notion of melding these two characters together for years. The most famous iteration is from the comics, and the one that Endgame is most obviously inspired by is the merged Hulk, which was later retconned as the Professor. This version of the character found a fairly harmonious middle ground between Banner and the Hulk, and the union seems to be doing pretty well in Avengers Endgame. Number 23, Fortnite. When the Hulk and Rocket head to Norway to visit Thor in his new abode, they find him shacking up with Korg and Meek, who are busy playing the hit video game Fortnite. It's worth noting that while a funny scene and the Russos are reportedly huge fans of Fortnite, it was a rather shameless act of product placement, given that Fortnite has an ongoing cross-promotion with the Avengers franchise, even allowing Thanos as a playable character in the game. Number 22, Ronin. It wasn't much of a secret ahead of Endgame's release that Hawkeye, who was totally absent from Infinity War, would be adopting his famous Ronin persona from the comics in the movie. And while the film never mentions Ronin by name, Clint Barton spends the first act of the movie slaughtering his way across the globe, killing those criminals who weren't eliminated by the snap. It's no coincidence that Ronin is taking on the Yakuza in Japan when he's finally retrieved by Black Widow, and though this is ultimately a rather loose interpretation of the comic book namesake, it nevertheless gave fans the most compelling Hawkeye we've seen on screen yet. Number 21, Budapest. When Hawkeye and Black Widow depart on their mission to Vormir to retrieve the Soul Stone, Hawkeye quips that they're a long way from Budapest. This is a reference to a memorable gag in the Avengers where Natasha remarks that the Battle of New York reminds her of a mission they undertook in Budapest, while Clint reports, "You and I remember Budapest very differently." We still have no idea exactly what happened in Budapest, and given that Black Widow doesn't make it out of Endgame alive, we probably never will, short of a surprise appearance by Hawkeye in her upcoming solo prequel. Number 20, Hydra. Most Hydra references in the movie are contained in the sequence where the heroes travel to 2012 New York to retrieve the Space, Mind, and Time Stones, and see the Russos cleverly retrofitting a number of nods to Hydra, whose infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't known to audiences in 2012. We get cameos from a load of Hydra agents, with Scott Lang even quipping that they look like bad guys, and the Russos also cleverly tease an elevator fight 2.0 after 2023 Cap enters the lift, but he instead diffuses the situation by whispering "Hail Hydra" to a shocked Sitwell. This is obviously also a reference to the famous Hail Hydra panel from the comics. Number 19, Loki's muzzle is finally explained. The Avengers memorably concludes with Loki being taken into custody by Thor, and for reasons that were never before made clear, the trickster god was fitted with a muzzle over his mouth. Fun fact, that muzzle is CGI, believe it or not, but Endgame hilariously explains why Loki ended up gagged in such a fashion, as after being captured, he mockingly assumes the form of Captain America and acts faux heroic. Thor, fed up of his shenanigans, promptly slaps the muzzle on his gob. Number 18, I Can Do This All Day. When 2023 Cap ends up facing up against his 2012 self, past Cap proudly tells him, "I can do this all day," serving as a callback to the one-liner Cap deployed in 2 prior movies. This time, of course, Cap has to endure the phrase himself, and hilariously quips back to Cap, "Yeah, I know." Number 17, Raiders of the Lost Ark. War Machine and Nebula head to Morag to retrieve the Power Stone before Star-Lord does in 2014, and after they open the vault containing the orb, Rhodey casually tells Nebula, "This is the part where spikes come out with skeletons on at the end of them." This is quite clearly a reference to Raiders of the Lost Ark, which of course popularized that very trope. Number 16, Stan Lee's cameo. The first shot, set in 1970 in the film, shows a car which is eventually revealed to be driven by a man resembling a young Stan Lee, who quips, "Make love, not war," as we pan past him. For extra kicks, the car has a "Nuff Said" bumper sticker, and its number plate reads 420. Subtle. It's not exactly clear how this cameo was achieved, though given Lee's frailty at the end of his life, it's probable that his younger likeness was a digitally superimposed over a stand-in, and Lee himself only contributed the voiceover. Number 15, Camp Lehigh. In order to get the Space Stone and the Pym particles, Tony and Cap visit Camp Lehigh, which was previously featured in both of the first 2 Captain America movies. If that's not enough, we also get to see younger versions of Howard Stark, Hank Pym, and Peggy Carter, while Zola himself is also swiftly name-dropped. Number 14, Back to the Future. Though Back to the Future is mentioned earlier in the movie, the first film gets a more blatant tribute during the Camp Lehigh sequence, as Tony Stark has a run-in with his own father, whose wife is currently pregnant with Tony himself. The tone of the exchange is extremely similar to Back to the Future, where Marty gets to preside over his own parents hooking up, and spends a ton of time hanging out with his own pops, George. The scene is especially reminiscent of the movie's ending, where Marty talks to George and Lorraine about their future and says his farewells. The composer of the score clearly noticed it, because he even utilized musical cues extremely evocative of Back to the Future during this sequence. Number 13, Jarvis. One of Endgame's more surprising cameos is that of Howard Stark's trusty butler Edwin Jarvis, who appeared in ABC's tragically curtailed TV show Agent Carter. He became Tony Stark's caretaker after the death of his parents, and Tony returned the favor as an adult by immortalizing his namesake through his Jarvis AI system. Jarvis appears for just a few seconds as Howard asks him if he recognizes Tony Stark from anywhere, but it's noteworthy given how infrequently, that is basically never, the mainline MCU actually bothers to acknowledge the existence of the wider TV universe. Number 12, Cap is truly worthy. Surely the single most crowd-pleasing moment in Endgame occurs when Cap saves Thor from being killed by Thanos by retrieving Thor's hammer and using it to beat Thanos to a pulp. It's not just a kick-ass fan service moment though, it's of course a payoff to the iconic gag from Avengers Age of Ultron, where Cap was the only Avenger capable of even slightly moving Mjolnir at a party, other than Thor himself, obviously. By the time Endgame rolls around, Cap is now recognized as fully worthy, and the result is one of the most gratifying setup payoffs in the entirety of the MCU. Number 11, on your left. After Thanos and his army prepare to annihilate Cap, he receives a last-minute transmission from Falcon, indicating that the dusted heroes have returned. Moments before they enter en masse through a series of Sanctum portals though, Falcon tells his pal, on your left, paying tribute to the gag from the Winter Soldier, where Cap would routinely run laps around Sam during their morning workouts. Number 10, Rescue. It's been rumored for ages now that Pepper Potts would have a more substantial and interesting role in Endgame after she posted images on social media of herself kitted out in performance capture gear, and indeed Pepper appears in the movie's final battle in her rescue armor. This is foreshadowed earlier in the movie when Tony finds his daughter Morgan playing with the rescue helmet, which he notes Pepper has never worn. It was great to see Pepper finally assume her superhero persona from the comics, if only for a brief moment. Number 9, Avengers Assemble. It's been a low-key running gag that over the course of more than 20 movies, we've never actually heard the iconic phrase Avengers Assemble uttered by any of the movie's characters. It was most blatantly teased in Age of Ultron, where Cap was cut off by the credits, but the Russos smartly saved the full utterance for Endgame's climax, where Cap finally drops the line just as the various heroic armies mount up to battle Thanos. It was the best kind of fan service imaginable, and again, an extremely satisfying payoff to over a decade of build-up. Number 8, T'Challa remembers Clint's name. A slightly more subtle callback now, as when the heroes are desperately trying to transport the Infinity Gauntlet across the battlefield, Black Panther saves Hawkeye and addresses him as Clint. You might remember the pair's brief showdown in Civil War, where Hawkeye introduces himself to Black Panther as Clint, and he coldly retorts, "I don't care." If that's not a show of respect, not to mention a more subdued dose of fan service for the most attentive fans, then I ask you, what is? Number 7, Spider-Man's instant kill mode. During the final battle, Spider-Man finds himself overrun by Thanos' army of monsters, and so activates the suit's instant kill mode, which turns Spidey's eyes red and causes the suit's iron spider legs to stab anything in the vicinity to death. This is of course a nod to Spider-Man Homecoming, where the suit's AI interface Karen mentions that the suit has an instant kill mode, which Peter naturally backs down from using. But when it comes to slobbering alien monsters, there's a lot less moral ambiguity there. Number 6, all the Iron Man callbacks. Given that Endgame is the ultimate farewell to the Tony Stark character, it's fitting that the film includes a ton of references, both visual and verbal, to the original Iron Man. Most obviously, Stark's final words in the movie are, "I am Iron Man," just as they were in the first Iron Man movie. The original arc reactor gifted to Tony by Pepper appears on his funeral float, and Happy Hogan tells Morgan that Tony loved cheeseburgers, as was his snack of choice after being rescued from Afghanistan. And if you stick around until the very end of Endgame's credits, you'll also hear metal repeatedly clanging together in what's clearly a nod to Tony Stark smithing his prototype Iron Man suit in the Afghan cave. Number 5, Harley Keener. During Tony's funeral, the Russos memorably panned past every major surviving MCU character in an incredible single take, cementing the enormity of this roster of heroes. But there's one blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearance that left some fans puzzled. A teenage boy is visible among the group, and that boy is none other than Harley Keener, who of course teamed up with Tony Stark back in Iron Man 3. Simpkins' appearance has obviously changed substantially in the 6 years between movies, so there's no shame in missing it, but it's a great nod to one of the more memorable one-off characters from Stark's past. Number 4, you're taking all the stupid with you. Once Thanos is defeated, Cap prepares to travel back to the past in order to return the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir, and Cap tells Bucky, "Don't do anything stupid until I get back." To which Bucky retorts, "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you." It's a poignant reversal of their exchange from the original Captain America, where Skinny Steve fires the same retort back at Bucky. Given that the film, oddly enough, doesn't give Cap and Bucky a grand emotional moment once Cap returns as an old man, this ultimately has to serve as their affecting send-off. Number 3, the Asgardians of the Galaxy. Thor ends up passing off Asgard's royal duties to Valkyrie while he decides to venture off to find his place with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Hilariously, Thor even refers to the group as the Asgardians of the Galaxy, not only confirming that the events of Endgame haven't much humbled his colossal ego, but also referencing the recent comic of the same name. It remains to be seen whether or not Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will actually be retitled to Asgardians of the Galaxy, which would be awesome, but it's also apparent that Thor has found a fine niche for himself hanging out with this ragtag team of spacefaring weirdos. Number 2, Captain Falcon. Despite many fans expecting Bucky to be the one to inherit Captain America's shield, old Cap ends up gifting it to Falcon, who gratefully accepts. It's not quite clear whether Falcon will formally take up the name Captain America or not, but there is plenty of precedent for it in the comics, and considering how underutilized the character has been throughout the MCU, this could be a way to give him a major boost. Between this and the upcoming Disney Plus show Falcon and the Winter Soldier, expect Falcon to become a major fixture in the MCU moving forward. Number 1, it's been a long time. Endgame's final scene reveals that Cap traveled back in time and rekindled his romance with Peggy Carter, as the pair are seen lovingly slow dancing to Jules Stein and Sammy Kahn's 1945 pop hit It's Been a Long Time, which continues playing over the movie's end credits. The song was also featured briefly in The Winter Soldier and even appeared on the movie's soundtrack, and given that the lyrics are about a person welcoming home their lover from the end of a war, it couldn't have been a more apt send-off for good old Captain America.